You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zeno.
Joining us now on the Hazard Ground Podcast, if you're an avid sports fan, particularly a Redskins fan, you'll know him as their special teams coordinator. But before he became an NFL coach, he was an Apache pilot in the United States Army, and he was also a graduate of West Point. It's Ben Kotwica on the Hazard Ground Podcast. Ben, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Mark, thanks.
All right, so let's start with your journey, because it certainly is interesting. You're the second guy now that we've interviewed that happens to be connected to the NFL. We spoke with Nate Boyer. So, I mean, before we get into the military kind of comparisons to the NFL, because I'm sure you've heard plenty of them throughout your career, you went to West Point. A lot of people that we talked to know they were going to West Point from a very early age. Did you?
No, not at an early age. I grew up in Chicago, and my dad was a police officer, so I had a little bit of discipline, and he was in the military for a few years, so had a little bit of that in my upbringing. But really grew up, wanting to do good in school and played football, and went to high school, and was fortunate enough to get recruited by a handful of schools, and really football was kind of my ticket into West Point.
So were you going there because you could play football there, or was that something that came after the fact?
No, I knew that when I came out of high school, I wanted to get a good education. I wanted to play Division I football, and really the military was part of it. There was things about it that appealed to me. I really liked the campus, and I think that's what kind of sold me on the place is when I was around the other students and the cadets when I was on my visit and such, and I could kind of assimilate to them, and I think I made a strong bond with a lot of those people, and I could see myself doing that. So made the decision, and it turned out to be a pretty good one.
You played linebacker at West Point and led the cadets to their last 10-win season and their last Commander-in-Chief trophy. But talk about your time there at West Point, the balancing of the military part with the football part, and how much did that prepare you for what was next in your military career?
Yeah, well, I think that West Point challenges you in a bunch of different ways. Obviously, militarily, academically, and athletically. So it's very difficult to be really great at all three of them. And so I think the one thing that West Point does a little bit is it teaches you how to fail and how to rebound. And so during my time there was definitely a handful of challenges. I can remember being a plebe or a freshman there and getting on the bus going to what they called mass athletics, and I went to the football place, and there was about 25 other linebackers with me, and trying to figure out, okay, so how do you just kind of survive, and what it teaches you is persistence and keep grinding. And fortunately, I was able to do that, and played the junior varsity team my first year, and then was able to start my last 3 years. So that's one of the pillars I think that leadership laboratory teaches you is how to overcome challenges, continue to grind, continue to be persistent, and in whatever challenges that face you not only in the military or in football but in life.
Just kind of take me back for a second, though. When you were at West Point playing football, I mean, you had to know that you weren't going to be in the NFL. I mean, is that fair to say? I don't want to sound insulting or degrading to your football skills.
No. I playing in the NFL was a dream, but I never. I don't say never, but I knew that would be an extreme long shot. It's one of those things in sports. Eventually somebody's going to tell you can't play anymore. Whether it's in little league or high school or college, or you don't make it to the NFL. One day somebody's going to say, hey, you just whether it's due to health or due to your ability, they're going to tell you you couldn't play anymore. So yeah, I understood that was a long shot, and I was just fortunate enough to contribute on a couple teams and win some football games and win the Commander-in-Chief trophy as you articulated there our senior year with a great group of guys. I really enjoyed the brotherhood, and that's really what it was. It was a tremendous brotherhood that we had there, and really enjoyed that time. And when I graduated from West Point, I was ready to go into the military, and I picked aviation, and I was able to get it, and I thought flying would be a pretty cool thing to do.
Did you know at that point in time that you wanted to be a coach? When did that pop into your head?
Well, I think I've always had the coaching aspect in my mind. I think that I was fortunate enough, whether it was in Pop Warner or Little League or even in high school or college, I was very, very fortunate to be surrounded by and led by and coached by tremendous coaches who influenced me in many ways. And so I could always see myself doing that. And as a player, I was one that other coaches always would tell me, hey, you'd be pretty good if you tried to do this. And so that was always something that I wanted to be a part of and do.
Do you remember where you were on 9/11 and the circumstances around it?
Yeah, 9/11. I was down at Fort Rucker, Alabama.
Oh, you were already there.
I was taking the AH-64D transition, the Delta model longbow, and I remember being in class. And for those for flight school, you usually go to class one part of the day and you fly the other part. And I was in class in the morning, and I remember we had a break in the class, and then it came up and changed a lot of things.
So you're at Fort Rucker, Alabama, and 9/11 happens then. Is coaching, that dream of being a coach, so far out of your mind at that point in time? Or are you thinking like, wow, my life is going to drastically change, and now I don't even know if I'll ever get to be a coach?
Yeah, I think when 9/11 hit, one of the last things on my mind was, going to coach at any level, much less the National Football League. I think that at that time it was the impact that event had on so many lives, and not only in the near term of those affected at ground zero, but what the secondary and tertiary effects moving forward would be. So, at that period of time, my focus was on the training and learning that aircraft and being the best officer and aviator that I could be. That's really where my focus was.
All right, so you're in flight school, and you're finishing that up, and you're going to your first duty assignment. How quickly did you think you were going to deploy overseas?
I wasn't sure. So when I went to flight school, that was in 1998, and so then my first assignment was at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And I spent some time there, and then that was in 2000. I was over in Bosnia. So that's when that was going on, back in 99, 2000. And then I came back to Fort Rucker in 2001 and took that longbow transition. So when that 9/11 event hit, my follow-on assignment was Korea. So, everybody knew that the game had kind of changed a little bit, and things were going to be a little bit different. So again, when that event hurt, I was already preparing for my follow-on assignment, which was going to be out at Camp Page, Korea.
Did you find that Korea was hard to deploy from? I've talked to a couple of other people on the podcast who were pilots in Korea who literally couldn't get overseas. Like they couldn't get to the Middle East because Korea was kind of like a stopgap for their career. Did you have any trouble? Did you actually deploy from Korea? Did you have any trouble getting out of there?
No, I didn't. So when I left that longbow course and my advanced course, I want to say it was 2000, 2002, I went to Second ID and was at Camp Page, Korea, and then that's when the war hit there. So other elements were deploying. So we were focused on our mission out there and doing our job. And then when I came back to the States, that's when I deployed. I left Camp Page, Korea, and I went to the 1st Cavalry Division at Fort Hood, and that's where I deployed. So when I deployed to Iraq, I was part of the second wave that went into Iraq.
Now, it's interesting for those listening because you mentioned that you went to Bosnia. We also have had other people who have were Apache pilots, as a matter of fact, in Bosnia. And flying missions in Bosnia is clearly a lot different than it was flying them in Iraq. I mean, the rules of engagement in Bosnia were much more stiff. It wasn't like you were looking for people to shoot and things of that nature yet. And obviously, Iraq, you're trying to save fellow soldiers on the ground's lives. So the question is, how much did flying in Bosnia prepare you for flying in Iraq?
Well, you're correct. I think that not only that the mission was different between Iraq and Bosnia, but the terrain was definitely different. The terrain in Bosnia was more up and down. The weather was obviously a lot different than it was in Iraq, and which was really a flat pool table that you flew over, dealing with the heat and the sand and the wind. But I just think that the time in Bosnia helped me with my craft. And what I mean by that is just the ability to continue to fly the aircraft, which I think you were always trying to get better at, and then navigating and communicating. And even while we were in Bosnia, we had missions where we were talking either with other aircraft or troops on the ground. So that air-to-ground integration portion of it was important in Bosnia, and it was very, very important when we got out to Iraq.
So when you get to Iraq, what were you told your mission was going to be? What were your expectations, and kind of how did that all play out? Did you get into exactly what you thought you were getting into?
Yeah, yes and no. I think that the mission was we were providing ground support for the 1st Cavalry Division throughout the area of operations. When we deployed, we ground convoyed up. We were at an airfield just north of Baghdad, and so when we got there, there was really nothing there. It was really an open airfield, so it took some time to kind of establish that as an operating base. And the missions were multiple. There was, as I mentioned to you, a lot of air-to-ground integration. I think that was the primary mission, was supporting the guys on the ground, that were executing missions down there. There were also route and ground reconnaissance missions. There was convoy security, whether it be on the ground or moving VIPs or other personnel throughout the country. So the missions were very dynamic. It was a dynamic environment, and it was always an evolving mission. So it was changing, but it was one that I was fortunate enough to work with a lot of great people, a lot of great leaders, and we really had a pretty good team. That was a pretty good team when we went over there.
Do you remember your first engagement?
Not my first. I remember a couple of them, and what I do remember is that I was fortunate enough to be flying with another aviator who was very, very competent and very good at what he was doing, and another wingman that was flying with me. So I owe a lot to those guys. The warrant officers that were on those missions with us were very experienced, very knowledgeable, and they were a tremendous asset to have in the aircraft, either with me flying or next to me.
Did you ever feel unprepared for any mission?
No, I never felt unprepared. There were a handful of other emotions going on when you fly those missions, but being unprepared was not one of them. I thought that the leadership did an excellent job in our train-up. We had gone out to NTC, and we had done a full spectrum of operations with the ground guys, the various maneuver brigades. The military, from my understanding now, the set is a little bit different, the way that the air-to-ground integration occurs. So we had multiple maneuver brigades that we were working with, and those guys were excellent. So I think that we were well prepared for the mission that we had kind of foreseen, and then those contingency missions which popped up all the time.
And the only reason I ask that, I don't ask it as a pejorative for those listening, as if to say that, Ben wasn't a good soldier or a good pilot or anything like that. But, war sometimes presents you with things that you haven't seen. And no matter how much you train for, and no matter how many times you do rehearsals and exercises to practice for what you may see, there are things you're just going to run into that you've never seen and that you're not prepared for. It doesn't mean you're an unprepared soldier or unprepared pilot in his case. It's just that's the way combat goes. But you mentioned you experienced some of the other emotions. Tell me about those.
Well, that just what sparks my mind right there, Mark, is you'd mentioned not necessarily being unprepared, but the enemy's got to vote. It's kind of like every Sunday that that I'm a part of in the fall now. You go in, you have a game plan, and much like the opponents that you play in the NFL, when we were in Iraq, the enemy had a vote. So that was. There was a lot of change in missions going on.
So tell me about some of the other emotions that you went through.
Well, I think there's a gamut of them. I think that as far as emotionally, you never know what's going to happen out there. When you're going to fly. So there was a little bit of a nervousness there. There's a little bit of uncertainty. I think that there's also a degree of confidence that you can get the job done, and I think that comes from those missions and those train ups that we executed, not only at our unit level, but with the with the ground guys. So, I think that the other thing that is that you kind of feel a lot is rewarding, and knowing that you're really helping the guys on the ground. I always felt that was our primary mission, and you could just hear, when you're making those communications with the infantry soldiers or the guys that are down there that you're helping them out. So that was pretty rewarding to know that you were providing support that those guys readily needed.
When you have to make the decision to pull the trigger in your craft and you're doing it to save lives, but I wonder, and particularly because you're a football player, now a football coach, there are times I would assume in a football game throughout your playing career where the guy across from you might have been bigger or he might have been stronger, and you were going to square up against that guy at one point in time in the game, and I think it's normal for the questions to creep into your head and say, how am I going to fare against this guy in front of me? Did you ever kind of have those questions about how you would react in the moment when you needed to pull the trigger to save somebody's life?
I just think that the training part of it really takes over. I think that, there's a little bit of instinct. There's a lot of preparation. You're just doing your job, and you're kind of, the word's not maybe in the zone or anything, but I think that there's just such a focus of what you're doing, that, if you've played sports or done something that you feel a lot of confidence in, you're just doing it, and you're not overthinking or anything along those lines. So that's kind of what I felt. I just felt a focus and understanding what we were doing was the right thing. And again, when the call came in to execute that, you knew that it was for a purpose of helping your fellow soldiers.
Did you ever meet any of the guys, that you were protecting on the ground after the fact?
Well, we would have mission briefs with ground guys, and so they may not, they don't know the face, but they may know the call sign.
Right.
So I think that was that was that was Vampire 6, or hey, that was that's where you get to interact with those guys, and they were great. They were truly professional and just great guys to work with.
Did any of them ever say thank you, or was it kind of like, hey, you did your job, I did mine kind of deal?
A little bit of both. I think you got a little bit of both, and I think there was a mutual respect on both sides. I think that they had a great respect for what we were doing up in the air, because I know that I had a tremendous amount of respect and for what they were doing on the ground.
Did you ever feel like you were more in control in the air than you would be on the ground? Is that part of the reason why you wanted to be a pilot?
No, I just the reason I wanted to be a pilot was I was in the military, and I thought, flying a helicopter would be a pretty cool thing to do. So that's really why I did it, and I liked the mission of the Apache and how it provided support, and so I just thought, all right, so if I'm going to be in the military and do this, I want to do something that I think is pretty cool. So that's really how I got into the aviation deal.
And I say that, again, tongue-in-cheek, because it's funny. You can talk to a lot of infantry guys who will tell you they're more in control on the ground than anywhere else with the weapon in their hand and at the ready, staring the enemy down. And then there are a lot of pilots who would tell you the exact opposite. I would never want to be on the ground. I have more control in the air of everything that goes on. So it's kind of like, depending on your viewpoint and how you look at the world, really makes you understand whether you feel like you're in control or not. So when your deployment to Iraq ends, you go back to the States, and what happens next?
Right. So we left, and we went back to Fort Hood, Texas, and actually during that transition, during my time in the military, I had always kept in touch with football coaches who had coached me. I was very fortunate, as I mentioned earlier, to be coached by great men, and Bob Sutton was one of those. And he was my head coach when I was at Army, and I was actually coming out of Kuwait, and I got an email from the then coach at West Point. This guy's name was Bobby Ross, who I got an email from him and asked if I would be interested in going back to West Point and coaching. And I kind of thought that, wow, this might be a sign, because it was something I always wanted to do. And I didn't leave the military because I didn't like it. I really left it because I really wanted to get into coaching. So I got that email, I responded to it, and then got back to the States, and then ended up making the transition from the military to coaching in the summer of '05.
I mean, how elating was that email to get? Were you just totally shocked when you got it?
Yeah, I was surprised. I was, and like I said, I kind of looked at it as, wow, this might be an opportunity that I can't pass up, and so I was surprised to get it, and followed up on it. Coach Ross was awesome. He was great, and allowed me an opportunity to get back into it, and that's where I started my coaching career.
When you left the military, did anybody tell you that they thought you were making the wrong decision?
No. I had tremendous support from my chain of command. Now, that's not to say that they tried to, keep me to stay, and I appreciated and I respected that. But I think my chain of command understood that this was something that I really wanted to do, something that I was really passionate about. Again, I didn't leave the military because I didn't like it. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed especially that team that went over to Iraq with me. It was a great team, and I just didn't want to be 45 years old looking back and saying, I could have been a pretty good coach. So at that time, in 2005, at the age of 30, I made the transition and went out to West Point to coach.
So is it fair to say that if you don't get that email, you might still be in the military?
That is fair to say, yes.
Okay. I mean, and again, that's I wasn't asking it in any other way than just, you clearly have demonstrated a love for what you did in the Army as a pilot, and obviously there's a greater love, and there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of us go on to, very successful things in civilian careers after the fact. So let's talk about your journey to the NFL. So you get back to West Point and you start coaching. What was, I guess it's kind of weird because, you seem to have an advantage over a lot of other coaches because you have this military experience, yet you're coaching at West Point and everybody's got military experience. Well,
yeah,
not on the coaching staff, but you know what I mean.
My time there, I went back and I coached at West Point's prep school. So I was the defensive coordinator at the prep school in 2005 and in 2006 down at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. Is where the prep school was, and it was neat. It was a really neat job because not only were you coaching football, but you had to do a little bit of everything. So it was myself and another coach, and was neat. It was great interacting with the the cadet candidates, and then also it was neat to do a bunch of different jobs. Not only were you the strength guy, but you had to do the video, you had to do the groundskeeping, you had to do the weight room, and you taught a couple classes there as well in physical education. So it was a pretty cool job.
Only a year into coaching at the prep school, another phone call comes that's unexpected, and you end up coaching with the New York Jets. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I was at the prep school. I just finished. Just had finished my second year there, and Coach Sutton, who I had mentioned earlier, was my head coach at Army. He called, and they were looking for what's called a quality control coach in the NFL, and they were looking for a guy to help him out on the defensive side of the ball, and then help Mike Westhoff was the special teams coordinator to help him as well. So he called, and I went up to New York and interviewed with Coach Mangini and Mike Tannenbaum, who was the general manager at the time, and it worked out, and ended up accepting the job.
So when you find yourself 2 years removed from the military, and now you're standing on the sidelines of the NFL as a coach, did you pinch yourself and go, how the hell did I get here?
Yeah, a little bit. I just, like I said, I consider myself very fortunate. I mean, it was, difficult, not difficult, but, you got to ask yourself some questions there, as far as, when you're leaving the military and you're kind of moving up those ranks. I had been a company commander in combat in Iraq, and was doing okay there. I think that would have worked out pretty well, but wanted to get into coaching. And then when you go to be a quality control coach, just to give you a familiarity with there, that's one of those jobs where you're working a lot of hours and not for a lot of pay, and it's kind of one of those things where you're breaking down film at night and doing the grunt work. So that began the climb of that ladder in the coaching industry, and that was rewarding because I was around a lot of great coaches during that time, and that's really how you learn the game. This quality control world is really how you break down, study opponents, and kind of understand the game more and more.
All right, so how long did you spend with the New York Jets?
So I spent, 2007 was my first year, 2013 was my last year, so that's, help me out, that's 7 seasons, I think. So I did quality control for 2 years, and then under Coach Mangini, and then in 2009, Rex came in, and Rex got the job, and that's where I transitioned a little bit out of defense and primarily to special teams, working with Coach Westhoff, and I did that for a handful of years, and then I got the coordinator job when he retired, and I did that for 1 year in 2013.
And now would be a good time to tell you that as a Giants fan, you left the team crosstown from the one that I root for the Jets to go to one of their rivals in Washington to be the Redskins Special Teams Coordinator. How did that go down?
Yeah. So, the NFL's, can be kind of transient. It's a little bit like the military, moving around from place to place. But 2013, Coach Gruden had called again. Coach Sutton had helped me out there, and he had known Jay's brother John, and Jay was looking for a guy to help him out on the special team side, and he offered me a coordinator job in 2014, and fortunately I've been able to stay, and we're battling, and we're going into our 4th year here. So it's been excellent. My family and I we love it right outside of DC here, and had some success in our second year, winning the division, making the playoffs, and unfortunately your Giants beat us in the last game of the year to keep us out this year. So we're in the process of trying to get better and try to make another run at it this year.
Well, we don't want to get into a football discussion right now because obviously it could get very heated at this point in time. But anyway, in all seriousness, so you're in the NFL, and I mean, there are so many parallels between the NFL and the military, and I hear them all too, and I get them from people. Do you get annoyed by them? Do you get bothered by them? What's your kind of stance on that when people talk about going into battle and going into war? I mean, it doesn't really affect me per se, but everybody has a different kind of take on it.
Yeah, no, I don't take it personally, or I understand it. I mean, I can see that there are some similarities there. I by no means mean that what we do on a week in and week out basis is a life to death and to correlated that way. But what I do see is some parallels on the planning aspect of it, at the strategic and the tactical level, how to use the resources that you have, which you do in the military. But probably the biggest one is putting a team together. I think that much like when you're in the military, when I was a lieutenant and a company commander, I mean, I was leading soldiers that, warrant officers that were, twice my age who had been in the military as long as I'd been alive. And so you're melding them with, guys that are just coming out of high school. And so just like in the NFL, you're taking guys from various backgrounds, whether it's socially, economically, age, you're taking all those guys together and you're building a team. So I think, to me, that's the parallel that I draw, is taking a group of individuals and working together towards a common goal. And whether that's in Iraq, executing those missions, or it's on Sundays here at FedEx Field, that's what we're trying to do.
All right, I want to ask you a bunch of questions comparing football and the military, and I want to caveat it by saying, look, none of this is meant to be a shot at either one. I'm just curious to know which side of life you find a little bit easier. For example, more insufferable to deal with at times, rookies in training camp trying to pick up special teams or privates in the military?
Both can be both could be a little bit frustrating at times, but I'd say that's about even.
More irritating, the head sheds of the military that you have to deal with and all the brass, or the front office?
Well, I think I try to keep the bigger picture in mind in both of those scenarios. So I've been fortunate enough. I can't even say either one. I've been fortunate enough to be around great front offices, and as I mentioned to you before, when I was in the military, I had a great chain of command. So I don't feel either one really.
When you look at an NFL sideline and you look at a military unit, what is the one characteristic that stands out to you about both of them?
The one characteristic that stands out to me is that whether it's a soldier on the flight line or in the military, or it's a young guy that's just come out of college, deep down inside, they want to do good. They really, really want to succeed. And I think that my mission, whether it was as a lieutenant or a captain in the Army or as the coach, is to provide them whether it's instruction or resources to perform at the best of their ability. I try to take them to where they couldn't go by themselves. And I just hope that I'm able to give them, whether it's the players that I deal with now or even the soldiers that I had back then, I'm just hopeful that I'm able to give them some tools because that's what they want. At the end of the day, they want you to be able to help them. And I know with our players that each day I try to, whether it's through a technique or a coaching point or, like I mentioned here before, a resource, I just want to try to help them be the best players that they can be.
Taking the concept of saving a life out of this whole thing, what is more exhilarating, completing a mission in the military or getting a W on Sunday?
Right now, it's a W on Sunday, and hopefully we can get a few more than our divisional opponents, especially those New York Giants.
You keep bringing that up here.
Get back to winning that division and having a shot at the trophy. So the W on Sunday is pretty cool.
What is more emotional for you, Sundays in the NFL or looking back at your time in combat and what you had to go through there?
Well, I'm so focused on what we're doing right now. I would say to you that in the moment and as I go about day in and day out, what we're doing here in Washington is pretty important and pretty emotional. I get into it now. if I get on my bike and I go ride for an hour and a half, or I'm sitting at a fishing hole thinking back, I really have great fond memories of my time in the military, and thinking about those guys that especially that team that I went to Iraq with, that can get a little bit emotional. But now's not the time to get captured and all that kind of stuff, because, like I said, once the season hits around, that's pretty important for us. So to answer your question, in the moment, it's the game. But if I have time to sit back, I just really had fond memories of my time in the military.
You talk about those memories, and you can hear the emotion in your voice about the bond that you have. Is the bond that's between soldiers the same as the bond between football players?
I think so, to a degree. Each person is different. I think the bonds between the players and the coach can be pretty strong, and those between soldiers, and in the military is pretty strong. So I think that those are forged, through the hard work, the time invested, and I think that's what makes things rewarding, whether it's being successful on a mission when you're in the military or winning on Sunday. So that hard work that goes into it, really fortifies the bonds that you make.
More physically challenging, Army PT or 2-a-days during training camp?
Probably the Army PT.
Really?
Now, I'm just a coach in 2-a-days, so you
Right.
could ask a player that might have a different. They might have a different take on it. I'm sure they probably do. Though we haven't had 2-a-days in a while, because the new collective bargaining agreement over the last few years has kind of reduced that. But for me, the PT, when we were going at it pretty good in the military.
When you get around new guys who don't know your background and experience, and rookies who come in, and they find out that you were a pilot in Iraq and were in combat, what's generally their reaction?
I think they're very respectful. They're very complimentary of what I ended up doing. What's amazing is the number of players that have, whether it's a relative or a friend that is in the military. So there's usually a good portion of people that have some kind of relation there.
When you look back at your time in the military and you look at your time in the NFL, is it fair to say which one has been more successful to you than the other?
No, not yet, because this one in the NFL is still going.
Yeah, right.
Got to hold that Lombardi up one day.
When you look back at your time in the military, is there something that you take it away from that you can constantly apply in the NFL on a daily basis with your players?
Yeah, I think that just the perseverance and the grind and overcoming the challenges. That's what I kind of take with me, and knowing in some of the places that I've been. Even though that it's can be a struggle at times and overcoming challenges, I think knowing where I've been and what I've done, that there's not much that can keep me back from what we're going to do.
All right, and finally, I want to ask you about this, and if you don't want to answer it, you are totally okay, and I won't even put it in the podcast because we're recording this ahead of time. I need to know about the cup on the sideline. Was that an instinct that you had from Iraq that, hey, when you got to go, you got to go?
Yeah, I mean, I think most men, well, not even most men, most people can kind of relate to that. There are some times that you just have to, bodily function takes over. So I'm just kind of exacerbated that somebody would take a picture of that. I mean, you got a football game going on, and hey, there's a lot of other things to look at, and I tried to be as indiscreet as possible, but it was an awful long run, and I didn't have time to go all the way there. So, but it was good for some laughs, and tried to use it as a learning lesson for the players. Life's a lesson you live and learn, and had a few good laughs, and just ended up moving forward. But I'll just keep that in mind next time I got to go.
Yeah, and for those listening who aren't familiar, just the PG version of it. It was during the middle of a game, and you had to go to the bathroom, and the bathroom was a long ways away, so you used the cup, and some clown, and I stress clown, literally took a picture of it because that's what we do nowadays when people do things. So anyway.
Yeah, so you just always be aware of your surroundings.
Exactly, right?
I think there's a handful of people that have been in that situation, and they know it's, you got to go, right?
Keep your head on a swivel there, Ben. All right, one more final thought. Okay. When you look back on everything and you talk to people now about your military career, what do you tell them? How do you characterize it?
I just I tell them that was a tremendous chapter in my life. I really enjoyed it, and I think what made it most enjoyable was the people, and that's what I take away from it. Whether it was at West Point, whether it was with the 1st Cavalry Division, whether it was in Korea, whether it was in flight school, the opportunity to work with really, really prideful Americans and come together as a team and work towards a mission. That's what I take with me. I take those relationships and those experiences, and when I made that decision, back in 1992, 93 to go to West Point, I had no idea where it would take me, and I would do that again in a heartbeat. And I just feel very, very blessed and very fortunate to be where I am today. So, as far as the military, I have nothing but great memories.
Well, Ben, listen, your story is inspirational. As a fellow guy who puts on a uniform, I'm proud of everything you've been able to accomplish, not only of your service, but look, to put yourself in the position, there's not a lot of NFL coaches in this world. There's a finite number of jobs out there, and you've got one of them, and you damn well earned it. And we certainly thank you for everything that you've done. And I do wish you well as a coach, even though it's the Redskins. I do wish you well. I want to see you succeed, just not at the Giants' expense. So if the Giants have a bad year, I hope you guys take advantage, and I hope you guys get all the way up and lift the Lombardi Trophy.
Well, thanks, Mark. I appreciate you having me on.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.